The rain hammered against the hospital window as 8-year-old Emma clutched her younger sister's hand. Sarah, only 5, lay motionless in the narrow bed, her breathing shallow and labored. The machines around her beeped in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of their nightmare. Emma's voice was barely a whisper as she looked up at the stern-faced man in the expensive suit. "Please, mister," she said, her eyes glistening with tears that seemed too heavy for such a small face. "Can you take her instead of me?" The man standing before her was Alexander Cross, CEO of Cross Industries, worth over $300 million. He had come to the children's ward not out of compassion, but to fulfill a corporate obligation, a tax-deductible charity visit that his PR team had insisted upon. He expected to shake a few hands, take some photos, and leave. He never expected to hear words that would shatter everything he thought he knew about himself. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Trillionaire in Love for more heartwarming stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Your support helps us share these powerful messages with the world. Alexander had built his empire on ruthless efficiency and calculated decisions. Emotions were weaknesses to be exploited in boardrooms, not felt in hospital corridors. But as he stared down at Emma's pleading face, something inside his chest tightened in a way that no amount of success had ever prepared him for. The little girl didn't know who he was to her. He was just another adult who might have the power to help. The story began 3 weeks earlier, when the Henderson family's world collapsed in a single afternoon. Tom Henderson, a construction worker, had been the sole provider for his family after his wife died in a car accident 2 years prior. Emma and Sarah were his everything, his reason to wake up each morning, his motivation to work double shifts, his light in the darkness that had consumed him since losing his beloved wife. But fate had one more cruel blow to deliver. A scaffolding collapse at the construction site left Tom with severe spinal injuries, rendering him paralyzed from the waist down. With no insurance adequate enough to cover both his medical bills and his daughter's needs, the family faced an impossible choice. The state was prepared to place the girls in foster care, likely separating them to different homes. That's when Emma, wise beyond her years, made a decision that would haunt Alexander for the rest of his life. She had overheard the social workers talking, understood that they could only afford to keep one of them at home with their father's limited disability benefits. Without hesitation, she volunteered to go into the system if it meant Sarah could stay with their dad. But then Sarah fell ill with pneumonia, and everything became infinitely more complicated. Alexander learned all of this from Dr. Patricia Mills, the head of pediatrics, who had been trying to find resources for the family. "The older girl, Emma, she's been taking care of everyone," Dr. Mills explained as they walked through the corridor. "She hasn't been to school in weeks. She feeds her father, helps with his physical therapy, and now she's been sleeping in that chair next to her sister's bed every night." As they approached Sarah's room, Alexander could see Emma through the glass window. She was reading a worn picture book to her unconscious sister, her voice steady despite the exhaustion evident in every line of her small body. Her clothes were too big, obviously hand-me-downs, and her shoes had holes that she tried to cover with tape. When they entered the room, Emma looked up with hope flickering in her eyes. She had been told that an important businessman was visiting, and in her child's logic, she believed that meant someone with the power to fix things, someone who could make the impossible possible. "Are you here to help my sister?" she asked, standing up straighter despite the weight of responsibility that seemed to bend her shoulders. Alexander found himself speechless. He had prepared talking points about corporate responsibility and community outreach. He had planned to spend exactly 15 minutes in the hospital before returning to his board meeting. But looking at this little girl who was willing to sacrifice everything for her family, all of his prepared words seemed meaningless. I'm here to see how things are going," he managed to say, his voice rougher than usual. That's when Emma made her request, the question that would echo in Alexander's mind for days to come. She didn't ask for money or toys or anything for herself. She asked him to take her instead of her sister, believing somehow that this powerful stranger had come to make the terrible choice that the adults in her world seemed unable to avoid. Alexander left the hospital that day without taking any photos, without making any speeches, and without the peace of mind he had arrived with. For the first time in 20 years of business, he couldn't concentrate on profit margins or quarterly reports. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's face, heard her small voice offering herself as a sacrifice for her sister's chance at staying with their family. That night, Alexander did something he hadn't done since he was Emma's age. He called his own sister, Rebecca, who he hadn't spoken to in over 5 years, due to a bitter argument about their father's will. "Becca," he said when she answered, his voice breaking slightly, "I met a little girl today who reminded me what love actually looks like." The conversation lasted 4 hours. Rebecca, who worked as a social worker in another state, helped Alexander understand the complexities of the foster care system, the trauma that family separation causes, and the long-term effects of childhood poverty. But more importantly, she reminded him of who he used to be before success hardened his heart. "You weren't always this way, Alex," she said gently. "Remember when you used to give me half your allowance when I lost mine? Remember how you worked 3 jobs to put yourself through college because you didn't want Dad to struggle with the tuition?" Alexander did remember. He remembered being hungry, being scared, being uncertain about the future. He remembered what it felt like to be powerless in a world that seemed designed to crush people like him. Somewhere along the way to building his empire, he had forgotten that feeling. He had forgotten the boy who once promised himself that if he ever had the power to help others, he would never hesitate to use it. The next morning, Alexander didn't go to his office. Instead, he returned to the hospital with his lawyer, his accountant, and a determination that surprised everyone who knew him. He found Emma exactly where he had left her, still reading to her sister, still carrying the weight of impossible decisions on her tiny shoulders. "Emma," he said, kneeling down so he could look her in the eyes, "what if I told you that you don't have to choose? What if I told you that your whole family could stay together?" The little girl's eyes widened, but there was caution there too. She had learned not to trust in miracles. "How?" she whispered. What Alexander did next went far beyond writing a check. He didn't just pay the medical bills or provide temporary relief. He restructured his entire approach to wealth and responsibility. Working with Dr. Mills and a team of social workers, he established the Henderson Family Trust, ensuring not only immediate financial stability but long-term support for Tom's medical care, the girls' education, and their housing needs. But the most unthinkable thing he did was personal. He arranged for the family to move into the renovated carriage house on his own property, close enough for him to ensure they had everything they needed, but independent enough for Tom to maintain his dignity as a father and provider. Alexander hired Tom as a consultant for his construction projects, utilizing his expertise in a role that accommodated his disability while paying him a salary that reflected his true value. The challenges they faced in the following months were significant. Tom struggled with depression and feelings of inadequacy. Emma had difficulty adjusting to being a child again instead of a caregiver. Sarah needed months of physical therapy to fully recover from her illness. And Alexander had to learn how to be part of a family dynamic, something his own childhood had never taught him. There were setbacks. Tom's pride made it difficult for him to accept help, leading to heated arguments about independence versus support. Emma had nightmares about losing her sister and would sometimes sneak out of her own bed to sleep on the floor next to Sarah. Alexander found himself learning to navigate the complex emotions of people who had survived trauma, people who had been let down by systems and individuals before. But slowly, healing began to happen. Tom started to see his role as consultant as genuine work, not charity, especially when his recommendations saved Alexander's company significant money on several projects. Emma gradually returned to being a child, joining the local soccer team and making friends at her new school. Sarah blossomed with proper nutrition and medical care. her laughter returning to fill the spaces that had been occupied by fear. The most unexpected healing happened to Alexander himself. For the first time in decades, he experienced the profound satisfaction that comes not from acquiring wealth, but from using it to transform lives. He began to see his business success not as an end goal, but as a tool for creating positive change. 6 months after that rainy day in the hospital, Alexander found himself at Emma's soccer game, cheering alongside Tom as she scored her first goal. Sarah was there too, healthy and vibrant, making daisy chains on the sideline. As Emma ran toward them with her arms raised in victory, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood, pure, uncomplicated joy. That evening, as the family shared dinner together, Emma looked at Alexander with the same serious expression she had worn in the hospital. "Mr. Alex," she said, "why did you really help us?" Alexander thought about all the business reasons he could give, all the tax benefits and PR advantages. But looking at this little girl who had been willing to sacrifice everything for love, he knew she deserved the truth. "Because you taught me something I had forgotten," he said. "You showed me that real power isn't about what you can take or accumulate. It's about what you can give and what you can protect. You were willing to give up everything for your sister. That's the kind of person I wanted to remember how to be." Emma nodded solemnly, then broke into the brightest smile Alexander had ever seen. "So we helped each other," she said, and in that moment, Alexander realized she was absolutely right. In saving the Henderson family, he had saved himself from a life of empty success and hollow achievements. He had rediscovered the part of himself that understood love, sacrifice, and genuine human connection. Today, 3 years later, Alexander Cross is still a successful CEO, but his definition of success has fundamentally changed. The Cross Foundation, inspired by Emma's selfless love, has helped over 200 families facing similar crises. Emma is now 11, excelling in school and dreaming of becoming a doctor like Dr. Mills. Sarah is a precocious 8-year-old who has never forgotten that she once had a sister willing to give up everything for her. Tom has returned to school part-time, working toward a degree in engineering while continuing his consulting work. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation belongs to Alexander himself. The man who once measured his worth in profit margins now measures it in the lives he's been able to touch. The executive who once believed emotions were weaknesses now understands that love, the kind of love that asks, "Can you take her instead of me?" is the strongest force in the universe. The question Emma asked that rainy day in the hospital changed everything. Not because it demanded an answer, but because it revealed a truth that Alexander had spent decades running from, that our greatest strength lies not in what we can achieve for ourselves, but in what we're willing to sacrifice for others. Sometimes it takes the innocent wisdom of a child to remind us that the most unthinkable thing we can do is to choose love over everything else. And sometimes, when we make that choice, we discover that love chooses us right back. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of what truly matters in life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, comment below about what love means to you, and subscribe to Millionaire in Love. Your engagement helps us continue sharing stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us all that in a world that often feels divided, love remains our greatest common ground. Thank you for being part of this community that believes in the power of human connection and the extraordinary things that happen when we choose compassion over indifference.